So here is chapter 2, exercise 7. This one mentions loan planning. Okay, so that looked interesting. So Midland Mortgage Company, there's actually a Midland National loan company, but it's spelled the way you would expect, M-I-D-L-A-N-D. Midland Mortgage Company makes 4 types of loans as listed in the table, so I'll have to look at the table. The company is trying to decide how to allocate $5 million in funds. Okay, so we want to allocate $5 million. And the risk cannot exceed 3.7%. So risk has to be less than or equal to 0.037. Formulating an LP model to maximize yield in allocating the $5 million. So maximize yield. So we'll have to figure out how to get our yield. Okay, so I need to turn the page here to get to the loans. So now the loans, I'm just going to actually call them X1, X2, X3, and X4. So loan X1, X2, X3, X4, and then my variables will be X1, X2, X3, X4, the number of dollars, right? So Xj is equal to the number of dollars in loan J. Yeah, so if I call it loan J, right, I've got loan 1, 2, 3, and 4. There we go. So you can change your mind as you move through these things. So we're told, oops, close that. So we're told the yield, so that's what we want to maximize, in percent is 7, 1, 8, and 14. But then risk, also in percent, is 3.5, 2.0, 3.8, and 4.0. Now, so, quit that. So what we have to do here is kind of figure out, okay, how do I get yield? How do I get risk? Right? So the yield, I think, is probably the easiest, right? So let's just think of it as, you know, if I put in $100 at 7%, my yield is, and now actually I'm not totally positive, but again it doesn't matter in some sense because it'll be a constant. My yield is, now here I think it's the 100 plus 100 times 0.07. Okay, that's what I think it is. So that would be 100 times 1.07. Okay, that's what I think the yield is. Now, maybe the yield is just that 7%. But it turns out it probably doesn't matter because we're going to allocate, most likely, if I want to maximize my yield, probably I'm going to allocate all $5 million, and so basically that's a constant. So it's not, it doesn't really matter. But, you know, it's one of those things that if we formulated it this way and we took it to a customer and the customer said, no, 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 you dipwads, yield is just the percentage part, the $7 on that 100, then, you know, then we'd change it. That's part of the modeling process. So, you know, I mean, people shouldn't call each other dipwads, but, you know, still the back and forth is part of the modeling process. So not a big deal. So we'll assume that's what we mean by yield. And so we would like to maximize 1.07 times our x1 plus 1.01 times our x2 plus 1.08 times our x3 plus 1.14 times our x4. Okay, now risk is a little bit different. So, so before I get to risk, let's also say, well, you know, we can actually make sure we use the whole $5 million by saying that x1 plus x2 plus x3 plus x4 is equal to 5 million. Now, I could say greater than or equal to 5 million, except we don't have more than 5 million. Sometimes that would be okay, but since I'm trying to maximize, probably saying greater than or equal to, that might not be the best idea. So I'm just going to say it has to be equal to 5 million. Okay, so we have that. And I'll go down here and cheat a little bit and go, well, I also know that x1, x2, x3, and x4 all have to be greater than or equal to 0. But now it's the risk. So partly I've been stalling, right, because I don't know, I got to think about what the risk means. So let's look at a number, you know, like the risk is 3.5%. Now, suppose I invest the whole 5 million here, right? Then my risk is 3.5%. It's not 3.5% times 5 million. That's not my risk, right? You know, so unlike the yield I could just do in true dollars, but risk needs to kind of stay as a percent. But, you know, let's say I took half my money and I invested it here at 3.5% risk and the other half at 2% risk, then I would say on the average I had the average of those two numbers, that 3.5 and the 2.0. Okay, so if I was going to do that, right, that half my money, well, so I've got x1 is there, x2 down here. My total is x1 plus x2. But actually, now it's kind of coming to me, right? In general, if that's all I invest, remember, we've said x1 plus x2 plus x3 plus x4 has to be 5 million. Okay. So I can take, you know, if x1 really was 2.5 million, I would just take x1 over 5 million. Right? And that would be my 1/2. And the same with the x2. And so, to get our percentages right, we're going to take our weighted average of these things. So I have 0.035 times x1. Now I'm going to wait and divide at the end here. Whoops. Plus, what do we got? 2%. So 0.02 x2 plus 3.8%. So 0.038 times x3 plus 0.04 times x4, and then I can divide everything by 5 million. Okay, and that gives me my proper weighting of everything, and that has to be less than or equal to, what do we say? 0.037. 0.037. Now, what I'd actually do is, probably for this model, go ahead and multiply the 5 million times the 0.037 and just make it look nicer that way and get that bigger constant over on the right. Okay, but that's our model. We want to maximize our yield. We have to spend all $5 million, and our average risk has to be less than or equal to 0.037, and all our variables need to be at least 0. Okay, I think that did it. So that is exercise 7.